Hello and welcome to Commodity Culture, where we break down the commodity space for both new and experienced investors. Standard disclaimer before we begin, none of this is investing advice. Do your own due diligence. And today we have a returning guest to the program, Rafi Farber, the author of the Endgame Investor newsletter. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jesse. I like being on your show. Let's do it again.
Yes. So a lot has happened since I had you on last time. It seems like black swan events are happening every day, and we're moving closer to the end game you speak of global currency collapse. So let's start with a broader question. What do you see out there in the economic landscape that has you most concerned today?
I saw this question, so I prepared for it. So I'm going to try to answer it in a way that maybe you wouldn't expect, your audience wouldn't expect. So I'm not really worried about the collapse. I'm not worried about much economically because I already see what's going to happen. I don't know exactly when. I know it's close, and yeah, everyone wants to know exact timing. If anyone knew exact timing, they could be, billionaires and just use options to time the exact day, and you don't have to worry about anything anymore. So we wouldn't be doing any of this stuff. But I'm not worried about collapse. What I'm worried about is the continued theft of the public by the central banking mafia. And that means no collapse, because collapse means that their monetary media is rejected, which means they can no longer steal. So what I'm worried about is that people won't turn around fast enough, and they'll just keep getting pickpocketed, for years to come until they really become destitute and starve. And we see that, for example, in Europe, it's already happening, that people are running out of energy, running out of gas. They can't heat their homes for the winter. People are going to die. The weakest of society, they're going to die. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. And the faster we wake up and reject this inflation by getting rid of the money, the fewer people will die. So, people have been asking, the other question I get is like, growth. Can you grow your way out of this debt, or can you grow your way out of the inflation? You could, but what that means is that, let's say somebody's stealing from you, somebody's picking your pocket, and you keep putting stuff in your pocket more and more and more, and producing more and more, and then the more you produce, the more he's able to steal from you. So what the inflationists want us to do is to produce more and more and more, so that when they steal from us, we notice less. I want to produce more, but I want to keep what I produce. I don't want to keep enabling them to steal from me by producing more, so I don't notice it. So we don't want to grow our way out of this. We want to stop growing, and we want to, pull an Atlas Shrugged on them and just stop producing until their money dies, and then they go away, and then we can produce again. That's really what hoarding gold and silver is about. It's not about producing, it's about conserving, and so they can't touch it. So I'm not worried about the collapse. I'm worried that it won't come fast enough, but it will come. It's going to come. I'm not in charge of history, so I'm not really worried about anything.
Great. Well, I definitely want to touch a bit deeper on that later, especially in terms of gold and silver. But right now, I want to talk about the Bank of England and what's going on with them right now, because I don't think enough people appreciate the significance of this event and how it could affect the broader economy around the world. They announced they would buy unlimited quantities of bonds to try to stabilize the market for UK government debt after the pension market nearly collapsed. And this all stems from Liz Truss, of course, proposing huge tax cuts and spending simultaneously. So I guess my question is England just one domino of many yet to come, and what implications do you see this event having moving forward?
Well, she's already sort of reversed herself by reversing some of the tax cuts. No, I'm all for tax cuts. Any tax cut, I'll be for it. I'm even for tax cuts without spending cuts, because that would just quicken the collapse, and I want it to come as fast as possible. But it's all the same. It's all the same thing. I mean, every central bank has been printing money like crazy since 2008 in different forms. The money that they print, it gets closer and closer to the consumer spigot every time they do it. In 2008, it was it was pretty behind the scenes in the repo area, but in the deep plumbing. That's the part they have to save. And now every time they do it, it has to get closer and closer to the consumer sector, which it affects prices faster and faster. So what the Bank of England is doing, so if you have these huge pension conglomerates, these huge companies that basically manage everyone's pensions, and they're all forced to buy a bunch of bonds, and then the value of those bonds goes down, and then pensions are in trouble, you shouldn't say, "Oh my God, what just happened?" It's pretty obvious what happened. Nobody's in charge of their own retirement. I mean, if you want to take it down to the base, like I avoid any of these pension programs, anybody managing my retirement. I manage my own retirement. I save money and I try to legally, pay as few taxes as possible. Hire someone to tell me what to do on that because I don't want anything to do with taxes. But we don't want any of these pension companies in charge of any of our money. And the fact that everyone just says, "Oh, my 401k, my this or one that," or, numbers and letters, and they have no idea what's going on, and they don't know where anything is invested. So the government controls these companies and says, "Okay, you have to invest in my stuff so that I can take your money and spend it on wars and paying off COVID, whatever, and masking people. Who knows what they spend? It doesn't matter." So yeah, when you force everyone to buy your stuff and the value of your stuff falls, they're going to collapse. And that's the same with every country, because every Western country at least manages everyone's retirement who doesn't want to deal with it themselves. And then they're going to lose everything. So yeah, the Bank of England is just the first of many dominoes to come. They're all going to be in the same problem. And no, just a little bit more money printing is not going to solve it.
So you made a video on your YouTube channel fairly recently titled "The Psychology of Hyperinflation is Taking Hold in Germany." So can you walk us through this concept and explain why Germans may be the first to try to get ahead of inflation in a big way, and how this could spread throughout the rest of Europe?
Yeah, well, simply Germany has in its cultural consciousness what hyperinflation is. When people point to hyperinflation and say, "Oh, Weimar, Weimar, Weimar," everyone knows it's Weimar. Other countries have experienced it, but Germany is definitely the most famous. And a cultural memory is very important for how a culture behaves under certain circumstances. It changes the way an entire nation behaves. And hyperinflation, it is qualitatively different from regular consumer price increases, because with regular consumer price increases, you might have, still, if you go back to that pickpocket analogy, somebody's taking money from your pocket and you don't realize it. So you're not going to turn around and punch him in the face and he's going to keep taking money from you. But once you turn around and you see, and this guy's still taking money from you and he's just doing it in broad daylight and you're like looking at him, you'll get physical. You'll say, "Get away from me, stop taking my money," and you'll punch him in the face. And then he's going to have a much harder time taking money from you. So the flip to hyperinflation is basically when everyone realizes on his own level of understanding, whether it's academic or all the way from the Misesian theory of hyperinflation. You read all the Austrian economics books and you understand, and but whatever, all the way down to like just a fast food worker who says, "I got to get rid of my paycheck right now or I'm going to lose it." He doesn't have to understand anything except for that. So it's everyone acting together. When everyone acts together, it doesn't matter what the central bank does anymore, because what's the fast food worker going to say? "Oh, well, the Bundesbank or the ECB has raised interest rates by 20%. I guess I don't have to get rid of this money." He's not going to say that. When it's already on the street, you can't control it anymore. When it's in the banks, you can control it, because the banks and the central bank work together and they say, "Okay, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that." And they'll say, "Okay, we got to control the public." Once it's in the public's hands, that's it. It's over. And the fact that Germany has a cultural memory means the public has a cultural memory that from their grandparents and probably from their public school system, when this happens, you got to get rid of the money fast. So they're going to be the first to do it.
And do you think you also mentioned this could spread to the rest of Europe after that? Do you think Germany will be the first to kind of fully wake up, and then other countries around them will start to see what's happening?
It seems like Germany should be the first to wake up. Maybe they won't. Maybe it'll be some other weird country that we never heard of. Maybe it'll be Lithuania. I don't know. But it makes sense that Germany would be the first to wake up, because they're in the most dire straits when it comes to energy right now. They've been cut off of gas almost entirely, and they've had the worst restrictions when it came to the whole pandemic thing. So they're pretty worn out. and they have a cultural memory, and they all use the same currency as everyone else. So once the euro starts hyperinflating in Germany, then other countries that use the euro will follow. It might take some time, but yeah, I mean, back in Weimar, it was just Germany using the Deutschmark, but now it's a wider area, so it's probably going to start somewhere, and then the infection spread. That's how an infection spreads, but it's not really an infection; it's a cure. It's not an
Yes,
infection.
I like that. I want to touch on the silver price here, as it recently reached levels not seen since June of this year. That's not necessarily super significant, but as Tavi Costa pointed out, it had its single biggest day move since November of 2008. Now, while this is significant, it feels like the powers that be can just smash the price down again through paper contracts. So, what's your view on both the recent price action of silver and also will the manipulation ever end? And is that kind of part of this whole hyperinflation currency collapse? Is that what it's going to take to bring that to an end?
Yeah, it'll end. And there are two camps here when it comes to manipulation. There's one that they control the paper price, and it's like this conspiracy where you have a group of people that are saying we have to do this in the futures market at that time in order to accomplish this goal. That might be true, but whether it is or isn't doesn't really matter in my view. I don't think it's true. I see it more as just, I take the Julian Assange version of, conspiracy, that one interview that he had many years ago was like, what was your biggest concern or your biggest revelation when it came to seeing all these cables and stuff? He's like, basically, it's just one giant mess, and the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and you have all these these factions that have their own minor power interests that are fighting each other, and then one of them takes over for a while, and the other one takes over. It's just like this monster with different heads. There's no organized conspiracy, I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong. It's fine. If the other side's right, good, whatever. So what I'm seeing in the silver market now is different from 2008 or 2011. Whereas and this comes back to when is the manipulation end? And the manipulation for me is just generally that there is a silver futures market, that you can sell more paper than physical that exists. But that's true in any futures market. It's gas and coal and whatever. And that's why you see these short squeezes in whatever nickel or gas or natural gas, whatever it might be, because you have more paper and you don't have enough physical. And that's what happens when it just happens to be in the precious metals too. So what I was saying is that now, if we take what was happening let's say 2011, when silver was moving to 50 very quickly, if you look at the physical premiums, they were actually negative premiums, meaning it was cheaper to buy a physical coin of silver than it was to buy a share of SLV. That was, at the $40, $50 area. So what that shows is it was just paper speculation. It was just like people saying, oh, this thing with 3 letters, SLV, maybe they didn't even know what it was, is going up. So they tried to chase it, and then they all got smashed. So now what's happening is that SLV, I think, had its third highest day up. Was it maybe Thursday last week? Was it? I think it went up like 10, 11% or something like that, maybe 9%. I looked at the SLV chart. It was the third biggest up day. Now, usually on an up day, SLV is going to have to put more silver in the trust in order to make it go in tandem with the futures price, so that there are more shares, so that it compensates for demand. You don't want SLV trading at a premium to futures. They don't want that. So this time, you would have expected that SLV would have added silver, but it didn't. It sold off silver. It had to contract the amount of shares because the demand for SLV wasn't there. So why was silver going up? The answer is it's in the premiums. It's in the physical market. That's where the demand was coming from. Open interest went down during that spike, which means it's not in that derivative market either. What's happening is the premiums are staying up. The demand is in the physical market. People are buying coins now. That did not happen in 2011, did not happen in 2008 very much. It happened a little bit. Now it's happening very strongly. We have record premiums of 40% in junk silver, and those aren't going away.
I've been pretty fortunate in that I've been able to convince my family to buy physical gold and silver and kind of help them wrap their head around what's going on. And so they've followed my advice, which is great. But for your average person, what do you think it will take to wake them up to the fact that gold and silver is real money? And do you think this is already starting to happen to a certain extent?
Average person. Well, we're talking about what, 80, 90% of the people. I mean, how many people really understand what money is? Even among the camp of, even the sound money camp, there's this whole Bitcoin camp, and they have some correct ideas, but I'm very much not in the Bitcoin camp. Not that I think it's a problem, but I don't think it's going to survive a monetary collapse. Because I think it's just another derivative of money on top of the other layers. Uh, so when will the average person wake up? When he sees that he's got to get rid of money or he's going to starve to death. Unfortunately, I mean, what we're doing is we're not trying to wake up the average people. I don't talk to the average person. I talk to the people like you and like Chris Marcus and and John Adams and this crowd that we're trying to get the people that sort of kind of understand that it's money, but they don't get it quite perfectly. Nobody gets it perfectly. I don't get it perfectly. But we're trying to wake up the leaders of various countries, communities all around the world so that they have as much money as possible so that they can retake the reins of society when everything collapses and really help people so we don't devolve into this chaotic dystopian nightmare. We want as much, we want the leaders to have on whichever level leader that you are to have as much money as possible, real money, which means you'll have as much power as possible, which means you'll be able to counteract, the bad actors here that are trying to restart the inflationary system and steal everything from everyone. So yeah, we're trying to wake up the leaders. The average person will wake up when the average person wakes up, and most of them won't wake up in time, but we'll be able to help them, which is why we have to wake up now.
So you've mentioned that during the hyperinflation in Weimar Germany, a house could be bought for around 75 ounces of silver. And you also said it's possible that we could see such a scenario unfold again. So could you explain how this is actually a realistic possibility in your view?
Yeah, it's just a question of math. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying it happened in the past. And because it happened in the past for a brief period in a monetary crisis, it seems reasonable that in another monetary crisis, it will happen again. Maybe it won't, but there is historical precedent for it, is what I'm saying. So just basic math. And the Weimar hyperinflation, you could buy a nice house in Berlin for about, $100. If we had foreign exchange students, exchanging $100 bills for these, nice pieces of real estate in downtown Berlin. So $100 back then, it was $21, 2065 or something an ounce, between $20 and $21 an ounce for an ounce of gold, right? So $100 bill is about 5 ounces of gold. And in a monetary crisis, what generally happens is central banks and banks go after gold. The public can't go after gold because it's too expensive, so they go after silver. And then the gold to silver ratio descends to about 15-1, which is historically the monetary average before 1873 when silver was demonetized. So in an environment where silver coins are money along with gold, then you generally have something around a 15-1 ratio. So 5 ounces times 15 is 75. Is it going to last? No, it's not going to last. It's not going to be like you're going to have like a steady, market of 75 ounces for a house. I'm saying at the peak of a panic, when people need silver because the gold substitutes don't work. And when gold substitutes don't work, you need actual silver to divide gold into retail amounts for maybe a few weeks, maybe a month or two at most. And that's even pushing it. Then in a panic, when people need physical coins to survive because they need to divide labor, then you could probably buy a house with 75 ounces of silver. So when you have that price, do it.
That makes sense. Now, the United Nations is calling on the Fed and other central banks to halt rate hikes, which seems completely insane and out of left field. What's your take on that situation? Is this just another sign that the end game is getting closer in your view?
This is just another sign of what I was saying before. Is there's no organized conspiracy. There are conflicting power centers. The UN is one of them. You don't usually see them coming up and talking, about monetary policy. What do they have to do with it? They have something to do with it. I mean, they get their budget from these governments, and if the governments crash themselves and the UN's not going to have a budget anymore, and whoever the interested parties at the UN are saying, we have to stop them from doing this or we're going to get cut off. So at the end, in the end game, you're going to see like all these conflicting power centers, kind of like, remember like the end of Terminator 2, when the T1000 ends up in this lava, and you see all the forms that he's taking kind of like, go up and down and up and down. He starts screaming. So that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing all the different power centers kind of like blob out of the big metal mass and scream for their share of whatever theft it is that they can't do anymore. So it's going to get more chaotic, and the prices of everything is going to get more chaotic, and the price of gold and silver is probably going to get more chaotic too, which is why you got to hold on to it and not do anything irresponsible and leverage yourself too much, because then you'll get thrown off the horse. We're in a rodeo here and the animal's going crazy. So you just gotta just calm down and understand what money is and hold through it.
So, what do you think it's going to take for the financial system to be put back in the hands of the people, allowing natural market forces to take over? So, is the end game required, I guess, is my question. I think you've already answered that in a way. And is that short term pain going to be needed to restore the world to sanity? And as kind of a follow up, do you think a lot of the insanity going on with all this radical political ideology that seems so ridiculous, is that connected to the fact that our whole money system is fake?
Oh, it's absolutely connected. It goes from one to the other. I talk about this a lot on my Patreon channel, where I focus more on biblical commentary, and I don't want to get too deep into that here. And I'm not talking about predicting the end of days or anything, or using numbers and math. I'm just talking about logic. I'll just give one example, one thing that I talked about on one of my biblical commentary videos, and that is that Isaiah, right? And he's always chastising the Israelites for what they did and how they acted. And one of the first thing he says is that your silver was full of dross. So there's one of the commentaries I looked at, and it says, like, why is he mentioning this? Like, because he's trying to answer the question of how this happened. How did this society get so corrupted? Full of murderers and sacrificing children to idols. It's horrible. So how did this happen? He says, well, it started with inflation. It started with coin clipping, because what did you do? How did you start this? You started selling your wares in the market, and then you started, adding copper to the silver and messing it up. And you say, okay, so I'll save a few bucks here by clipping the coins. Nobody will notice, and it won't be so bad. And the truth is, at the beginning, it's not so bad. Okay, so you clipped a few coins and you saved a little bit of money, but then but then you follow down that path. You follow down that path, you get totally corrupted. You start thinking crazy things like God wants you to sacrifice children. In the end, it takes hundreds of years, but you get there. And in a modern sense, it takes what we could say since 1934. You could say since 1971, but really the inflationary cycle started before 1971. That was just an admission that the inflation is here and we can't keep this pretend price of gold anymore. But it's been about 90 years. That's less than a few hundred. It took hundreds of years for the Israelites to collapse. It's taken 90 years for the American and the Western society to collapse. So yeah, there's absolutely a connection. It's one to the other. The crazy ideology comes from people that get their welfare checks or their checks for just spouting nonsense in university, because the government pays their tuition and then recycles them through the system. And you have all these crazy people saying all these crazy things and getting money for it, inflationary money. But once they can't, and they either have to work and actually do something or starve, they'll stop saying all this nonsense.
Right. It could take a huge recession worldwide to kind of wipe away a lot of the insanity. And what do you think it will look like when things do get restored to a semblance of sanity? What do you see the money system looking like at that point?
Well, this is more like a hope than what I see. I don't know how we're going to handle this. We're going to handle it somehow. But what I would like to see, what should be done, is that, like Ron Paul's idea of competing currencies. Like, when you have private markets, they tend to run more efficiently. So money is just another market. It's just the most marketable commodity. That's what it is even now. It's just we use inflated substitutes. So, in the immediate aftermath, you'd probably have, gold companies or gold miners issuing paper certificates to their shareholders, and then those could be traded. And then you'd have goldsmiths and silversmiths, making their money. And, silver would be in the immediate aftermath, you'd need it. But once you'd have functioning gold substitutes, could be a gold-backed blockchain, could be more paper. We're probably, keep the digital. It'll probably be a gold-backed blockchain, I see, because that's most efficient. It could be something else, but as long as you have competing companies issuing whatever, competing gold blockchains, competing gold substitutes in whatever form, then the most honest gets the most business. And that's it. There's nothing else you need to do. You don't need to plan these things. These central planners, they always want to put their mark on things and they just mess everything up. Just go do your business, do your own thing, be part of the division of labor. And if you can't, then I guess be a bum. I don't know. That's what most of these politicians should do. Just, be on the streets and beg for change.
I like that. I like that. Do you think any commodities in particular, aside from gold and silver, are going to benefit as we see a return to real assets and a shift away from illusions and madness that has ruled the markets for so long? Perhaps energy producing commodities, base metals. Is there anything that's catching your eye there?
I would say maybe platinum as a sort of quasi-monetary commodity. That could end up being, if you have like a privatized system of competing currencies, when people reject central banks, and when they reject central banks, they're going to reject them for good this time, because it's going to cause a global hyperinflation. So you might have a company that's able to use platinum as a money. In terms of energy, well, energy prices are completely whacked out right now. And this is really a monetary problem. It's not a Russia problem. If the euro was stable, then they would have a little bit higher prices, but it wouldn't be like this catastrophe of like 10 times and shutting down industry. So energy is going to settle somewhere. It's not going to settle at 10 times what it was before, at least in real terms. But once this fake money falls, then all commodities are going to rise. You need to have like an industry specific expert to determine what metal is going to be used in the post-inflationary era, or what commodity is going to be used most. I don't really know. I'm not really a commodity expert in that sense. I'm more of a monetary focus guy. But in general, stockpiling any commodity now is going to help, because people are going to need real assets once the money is no longer functional.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Rafi. For those who want to learn more about the Endgame Investor, where can they find that? And could you give us a little intro to what it is?
Yeah, you can find it just by Googling it, Endgame Investor, or use any other search engine if you don't like Google. I don't like Google. Nobody likes Google anymore. It's on Seeking Alpha, the Endgame Investor. And what it's about is I don't necessarily try to predict every movement or say gold's going up now, gold's going down now, silver's going up, whatever. And I cover the COMEX a lot. But mostly I focus on emotional balance, meaning you have to understand and admit to yourself that nobody really knows exactly what's going to move and when, but you have to be able to handle whatever swings come your way. So basically imagine the worst case scenario in your current allocations. And if you can handle that, then okay. But if you feel that you need more cash because you need to be able to sleep better, then do that. But you always need to have some kind of positioning in case the end game blows up tomorrow. And you always need to have some cash in case, they decide to tighten more, and then the paper market is smashed, and then your positions go down, and you can't panic out, because it's going to get crazy. You have to understand that and be okay with it. And then you'll get through it. It's about mental toughness more than being able to predict, absolutely what's going to happen. Even though I do take my stabs at that, but I do it with some humility, and knowing that I'm not going to be right all the time, but I'm going to be stable, whether I'm right or wrong.
Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.